Hello everybody. This is Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday at 3 p.m. to try and figure out where the smart building industry is headed. Panelists are listed on mondaylive.org. A reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's have another interactive conversation today on the Zoom chat and Q&A if you want to use that. This slide deck is available on mondaylive.org if you need anything that we present. So our topic for this month of July is overcoming barriers. This is our second show of the month. Our agenda are normally our normal chit chat, and then we'll talk about overcoming barriers. And last week we talked about technology adoption. And this week we're going to talk about business challenges or challenges in the business that we're in. So hopefully we'll have an interesting conversation. But before we get there, hand it over to Ken. What's going on in Ken world?
Automated Buildingville, yeah. Okay, our July issue is up. ESGs are us, and getting good coverage with that. We've also got our article online, ESG Spells Opportunities, on the Connected Contractor magazine. The picture's down below there. We're now working on our August theme, which is preparing for AHR 2023 in Atlanta. And I think last year we got started a little bit late, and there was a lot of unknown with COVID. So I think we want to get going a little sooner. There was some comments about they wished the program was a little wider. So I think this is the opportunity to engage those folks that do read Automated Buildings to give their thoughts as to what they think that we should be telling the industry. Put a link there to our last year's program, so for those that haven't been involved, they can get a gist of what it's all about. We've been invited to do our presentations again. It's our 23rd year, and we're working to get a new website. Will be online here shortly, I hope within a few months. And we're kind of where Automated Buildings was originally curated, and the industry sent all their information to me, and I basically put together this funny looking website. We've got sort of a more conventional looking website, and the thrust is that contributors and sponsors will actually have their own space and will actually write on it. So that'll be kind of a different approach. And what I'm trying to head towards is a handoff of Automated Buildings from a Ken blog to an industry blog that everybody would be involved in. So contributing editors will have their own little piece of the wall to write on, and we're hoping that'll go good. We're just working out the details of how that's going to go, where it's going to be hosted and all of that, but we're close. So I think it's going to be a great example of how we can, because we all are kind of focused on AHR, so maybe we can use this vehicle and see how it works, I hope. Back to you.
Thank you.
It'll be interesting to see, if you've been doing this 23 years, what was some of your original articles back when?
Yeah, it was basically, it showed a guy with a palette, I think, like a Picasso kind of thing. The art of the sustainable building automation, I think, was 2000 in Dallas. And actually, the other funny thing is that when the guy asked me if I would do a presentation, and the reason is that my claim to fame is that I'm not any company, and so AHR is very sensitive to have any company, because if they have somebody, then they get extra advertising that everybody is buying from them. So they want to have somebody who is not buying won't buy advertising from them. So we got involved in that. But anyway, yeah, it was actually one of my first speaking partners was the one that Anto was talking with Dave Branson. So I was excited to see Dave back again. He's been
It was good
forever.
talking to him.
Yeah.
The articles may be eerily similar to what we're discussing today, unfortunately.
That's the worry that I had,
And-
Tracy.
I was gonna say, that's scary, and it goes, all right. They were in hieroglyphics, the way Ken, used to write, and then it's also about how far have we come? I mean, do we need to start answering that question? How far have we come?
Well, that's what I was thinking, and I think Ken's got a good history of what's out there.
Yeah,
If you
definitely.
want to go back to a library,
Yeah, Ken, isn't on the site that the history, you've been keeping that up too, right?
Yeah, every article. Actually,
Yeah.
what I did is when I posted Anto and Dave Branson's talk, I brought up an article written by Dave Branson. Dave was one of our contributing editors back in those days. And it didn't read all that bad, actually. It was what, 2006, I think it was, or something like that. Yeah, you're right. We're spinning our wheels. So that's I think is part of our idea too, is to try and reach out and get more people writing it. The other thing we'll do is we'll try and lose the monthly model, and when people have information they have to share with the industry, they'll be able to go into their own space. So this will make someone like a contributing editor like Mark Peetock much more powerful. If he has a thought, he'll just hammer it down and it'll appear on the site the next day if I let it.
oh, good, there's still a control.
In the beginning.
All right, let's move on, shall we?
Yeah.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay.
Gina,
Yes.
you put this up. I'm assuming you wanted me to bring it up, which I have.
Oh, okay. So yeah, thanks. This is just a lot of writing on here, but since we were talking about blockers, this isn't a blocker, but this can help to overcome a blocker. And I just thought this was interesting because you're hearing a lot about impact investing, and you can kind of, you guys can go to the side and take a look at it. But it was talking about more and more companies or more and more investors are looking to invest in companies that have ESG goals. The one thing about this that I thought was very interesting is the reason why. And there was a study that was done. I think it's been like 19 years, and or 18 years. Sorry, Harvard Business found that companies that developed ESG early in the 1990s, they outperformed a carefully matched group over the next 18 years. So those companies that were, had those ESG initiatives in place, and people that invested in those, they did not do any worse than, and they actually did better than those that did not have those. And so one of the reasons for the impact investing is that companies are realizing that it's about continuality. And so that they need to make sure that the company has the resources it needs to, so that it won't fail. It also says that failing to integrate the ESG issues is an impact to the fiduciary responsibilities. And then the other last thing I'd say, when it comes this one in green, when it becomes clear that people who decide whether or not to buy have internalized ESG into their calculations, the business leaders will be forced to do the same within their companies. So when we look at ESG and things like that, and I'm just bringing up ESG, but when we look, and it can be things like smart buildings or better management of a building in general, more and more people are looking at, how are you putting these things in place? And as it's driven not only by regulators and politicians, but it's also being driven by the average person who's saying, I want to invest in companies that are not only fiscally responsible, but sustainable as well. And so that's kind of a new way of thinking that. Now, personally, me, I when I go and pick my investments, I don't necessarily look at that. But you know what? After reading this, I said, well, they make a point. If you care enough to actually have these goals in your company, you probably care enough to take care of your company financially. So
Interesting.
I thought it was really interesting. So I just thought I would share.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Gina. Anno,
Yeah, I haven't posted for a while, so I thought this was really interesting. This just came out last week. We continually complain about lack of funds for green initiatives and such like. And then here's a posting of what's happening in Singapore. Singapore government, they're going to set up a public sector bond for $35 billion, 25 billion US over the next 7 years. People say too, by the way, that 2030 seems like a long way, but 2030 is only about 6-7 years, 7+ years away, so not that far. Anyway, so sort of this is what's happening in Singapore. For those of you who know it, been there, it's a scale size. It's a tiny place, and when they're investing $35 billion into these sort of initiatives, kind of drive some of the thought processes of what can be done.
what is it for? That's the list on the right hand side?
On the right hand side, they're the eligible projects. Yeah, that would be that you could go and get some bond funds against. They're starting with infrastructure. Infrastructure is going to be the initial focus, but green buildings, energy efficiency, renewable energy, sustainable water management. As you can imagine, in Singapore is a big deal. They get all their water from Malaysia, so water control and management, wastewater is a huge aspect of it.
Great.
And of course, what happens with this, of course, is this stimulates, ideas, innovations, new technologies, new approaches. That's really what this drives, right?
Mm-hmm. Great.
So the question that I have then, Anno, is this works in city-state like Singapore, works in a place like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, UAE, Qatar, whatever. Do you think this could ever work in the United States?
No, never. Never going to happen. One thing that I've learned, having lived here for the last 25 years, is how small and local the US actually is. It doesn't think as a nation state. It doesn't think as a country. It thinks as local instances. So, what the best you can hope for is cities, states, will have some initiatives that would rival, a $35 billion initiative from Singapore, which is still valid. If California does something, it still rivals what a Singapore would do, but not as a nation, no.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on. I've been watching this. Obviously, I come from London, so the thought of London being 43 degrees C, which is nearly 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which is even hot for Texas.
That's what we're expecting today. Today's supposed to be 110. Tomorrow's supposed to be 111 or 12.
It's Tuesday for us. Every day.
That is crazy. And I saw this. I didn't know this happened, that you can actually turn salt gritters to sand gritters, and that's needed to sprinkle over the roads so that they don't melt.
Really?
Did anybody know that?
No.
Anyway, I thought this picture of the guard was cute. Anyway, moving on.
Anto, sorry, I had it right first time. I was talking to somebody in England a little while ago, and they were talking about this very subject, how hot it's been and so forth. And you forget they're just not prepared for it from an air conditioning HVAC standpoint, right?
Right.
And so everybody's miserable. It's a national alert, and people are worried about elderly dying. And I mean, it's really a pretty serious matter there. Yeah.
Because they don't believe in it. My wife and daughter were just in the UK all last week, and my older daughter's there through the end of the month. And they don't have the concept of air conditioning in homes and apartments at all.
Window.
And the idea of having a room air conditioner that you just stick in the window from time to time, no. I talked to Roger about it, and the mentality just isn't there. And I sort of like laugh at them. Come on, get over it. It's an obvious solution, and it doesn't cost a lot of money, and it works.
Yeah.
But it's a cultural thing.
But it's also, it hasn't been needed though, Steve. I mean, it's been a couple of days, and the rest of the year you open the windows, right?
Right.
And so I
Hey,
think it's a
Air,
change.
air conditioning is air conditioning, you know?
Yeah, but I live there, and having a nice warm day, you go outside, and that happens so infrequently across the year that the thought of air conditioning just doesn't make sense. Not even in cars back then, but obviously now cars are. But it's crazy. That may well change.
Yeah. I like the fact that we're kind of dancing around. There's actually something warming up called the globe. Don't start, Faye.
I was actually thinking about that, and I'm actually not sure, because this seems to be drastic. Somebody was proposing to me that that volcano in Tonga actually has created a lot of the climate patterns this year. It's very, very specific. That's happened before, but that doesn't make climate change go away. But it's just the severeness of this year seems special.
I would agree with that.
Having survived Mount Pinatubo, the largest volcanic eruption of the last century, when that happens, it actually lowers temperatures.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Sure.
Anyway, overcoming barriers. So
Before we go there, I got one thing to add for
Okay.
the group, is that I saw something today that CBRE came out with the following. The current space per office employee has fallen nearly 5% from pre-pandemic levels to 152 square feet, according to recent insight from CBRE. The figure represents a 22-year low for per employee office space allocation and goes against what some expected would be social distancing requirements that would boost employee space. So that's kind of interesting that, again, trying to adhere to the new standard. I don't say standards, the new guidelines or what thinking because of COVID. And here, instead of going forward, it seems like we're going backwards. But then again, I think maybe part of this, which is an unread part of this, is that we know people are on a hybrid working model and they're not in there 5 days a week like they
Right.
used to.
Yeah.
So I think that probably has a lot to do with this number.
yeah, I was going to ask about that, if that was taken account, because they're not staying 6 feet apart, they're staying a few miles apart.
Right, exactly. Anyway,
Mark,
So-
I'm actually surprised the number is as high as it is. Because
you
it
mean
seems
the
like
152? The
yeah,
152
I would have
square
thought
feet?
it'd be something under 100,
Right.
because the space that's being allocated generally for a person is 8 by 10, something like that, or less. So I'm surprised it's over 100. I wonder if that includes common areas, some portion of common areas.
Yeah, they didn't say in the article, but one of the things that I read out of it is that this smaller, leaner office footprints, does it equate to cost savings for the building owner?
Right.
Which I think it does. But
So
anyway.
let's move on to overcoming barriers, which this week we want to focus on business challenges. And we've been talking about this internally, the group. We have planning calls and other sort of communications. And obviously on Monday Live, we've been talking about this sort of the business model and the move to SaaS and the sort of the CapEx, OpEx stuff and procurement and all these kind of things that we think is sort of changing. And that's sort of challenging this industry to deliver something. So we actually want to start by asking this question, which is a little bit provocative intentionally. And I'm going to leave this out for a bit, and then the panelists can talk about this, but we'd also love to get your thoughts about what that word is in that box. Building owners are or aren't something. Who wants to start on the panel? And Go
Didn't
ahead.
Didn't I say I wasn't gonna really speak to this? Because I'm gonna put the words in, building owners aren't motivated.
Bill. Hmm?
Knowledgeable.
Anyone chiming in on chat?
No, not yet.
Building
yeah.
owners are cheap.
Does it have to be one word?
No.
Nope. Building owners aren't convinced that data analytics will reduce energy consumption.
Yeah, I like the one word one.
Oh,
Yeah.
did you guys see that it's saying chat is disabled?
Oh, yeah.
How do I do that?
Oops.
Oops.
I don't know how to undisable it. Try and figure this out if you can continue.
Maybe you can, maybe it's unshare. I don't know if that would have something to do
I
with it.
see Anno's and I.
There it
sent-
is. It's there.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's just the host. May not be the
Oh,
panelist.
okay.
The
Host and panelist, yeah.
So I'll throw one in here. Building owners,
I've changed it.
all right, building owners have a fear of failing.
Okay, can somebody just try it now, please?
I
In
just
the
did.
audience? No, in the audience, somebody
In the audience.
there you go.
There you go. Thank you. Thanks, John.
Becoming ostrich. There you go. Need incentives. That's better.
Are under pressure. Okay.
Oh, I like that one.
I would say are risk averse.
Oh,
Oh,
jinx.
Steven said the same thing.
Jinx.
Ah,
That's a good one.
yeah.
I would say
Jimmy?
are confused
That's
or
true.
unclear. Maybe that's better.
That's why I said knowledgeable. Would that, I
It's
mean,
the opposite of it. Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same.
I overwhelmed. Oh, Joe, you just beat me. Damn.
Didn't know this was a contest.
Yeah, I know, right?
I would say, fiscally motivated.
Not
Are.
motivated or are motivated. Are or are not.
Are or aren't. I think it could work either way, because I took this as it could work, whatever you said, it could work both ways. Either building owners are knowledgeable or they aren't knowledgeable, or either building owners are fiscally motivated or they are not fiscally motivated.
Well, let's go with the majority.
They aren't.
Okay.
Or they are fiscally motivated, but they aren't knowledgeable.
Okay, I'll buy that.
One thing that I was just thinking that's actually got nothing to do with the way they think is that building owners aren't a single entity.
Mm.
Eh?
They're not all the same. They're not a monolith of the same behavior. Right? There are different types of buildings, but there are also different types of people within a building owner entity.
Well, okay, but let's be clear that you're talking about building owners. So I'm not talking about people who run a hospital, because those people don't own the hospital. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and every owner has a slightly different profile, right? Depending on building type and financial situation, whether there's, owner occupied or tenants, or that'll change how they behave significantly.
Yeah. So the word owner is maybe even questionable, but
I think also building owners, they seem to cycle. And I don't know what the period of the cycle is. Sometimes you get an organization, you're talking to them, and they get a new person, and they're all going to do stuff, and then 2 years later they're not. Oh, this is good.
thanks, Joe. They're waiting. What are they waiting for us to figure it out?
Yes.
That goes all the way
I think
back.
John Turner said it much better than I did. I'm not a uniform market segment. That's really what I meant.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
I would say are not early adopters, going way
Yeah.
back to earlier conversations we had a year ago.
Yeah, actually have that slide still there.
Oh, there you go.
Which someone said up there to risk averse. I think that's Stephen said risk averse. Right, which
Mhm.
goes with that.
So the reason why I left that here is that we talked about this last week. And you know, one of the problems that this highlights is that if you are a vendor or if you're in industry and if you're one of these colors and your customers are a different color, it ain't gonna work, right? If your a product or service or industry or technology is suited for early adopters, you're selling to early adopters, you're great, but you'll never sell to early minority or late minority. So it's the difference, the synchronicity of the vendor buyer, the seller buyer is maybe a lot of what we've been talking about today. So,
See, I've read this chart always differently though, Anto. I've always read that the mission is to get from early adopters to early majority. That's the mission of what you're trying to do.
well, that's crossing the chasm bit.
That's crossing the chasm, right? That's the mission, right? Is crossing that chasm. I've never seen early adopters as being a market in of themselves.
They're not, but if you, the whole thesis of this is if you're developing something new, you're by nature, you're in the innovator, you're in the yellow or green.
Right.
And you normally find market, it's a small market in people who are buying with that mentality as well, innovators or early adopters. And you cannot, it's very, very difficult for you if you have a product that's suitable for early adopters to sell it to an early majority because of the difference in how they behave.
No, I get that, but my study on this chart has always been that regardless of the market, right, whether it's bowling balls, nanotechnology, or buildings, people within our market, that market or whatever market, fall into these buckets. Even in the building category, there are people in the building systems, building owners who will take, you know, who are classified as early adopters. They tend to take risk and do the, you know, and we've had several of those sort of people in the, you know, in our market. You know, look at what Microsoft did in the early days with what's his name, Smith, and stuff like that. So I've always looked at this chart as, given any market, there are the early adopters, there are the early majority, and then there's always the late majority, and they're always fixed. They're always the same, regardless of what they're looking at.
So this distribution applies to our market, to building owners.
Yeah.
And
So in a,
the mismatch is probably that a lot of us who frequent this venue here on Monday tend to be innovators and the, you know, new product, new technology, new way of doing things people.
right.
And so we have a fundamental mismatch between who we are and where the big business is, so to speak, in our industry.
Right, which is again the crossing the chasm challenge, right? Is so some people, I think, to what Anto was saying, there are some people who are quite happily to sit in the innovator early adopter space and, you know, constantly come up with new solutions and technologies and never cross the chasm to the early majority. And then there are others who have successfully brought in some new technology, and, you know, I could quite vocally argue that yeah, John Petsy and Sky Foundry, right, in a lot of ways, fault detection. And I know there were some others, but I think Sky Foundry has done a good example of taking it from early adopters to early majority.
Stephen talked about the risk element of going across this chart, which is a major part of it.
Yeah.
The majority and especially the laggards, they cannot accept any type of risk.
Yeah, Scott's got a great point there about the actual core idea of the chasm, and I couldn't agree more. And we've talked about this for years on this call. Less about the tech, more about the outcomes. It suits the nerds very well in the yellow and green. They really care about the tech, and now it's about the outcomes.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, I'd like to say something that could turn this conversation a little bit on its head and actually bring some practicality to this question here. And the people on this call can hear what I'm about to say, so it's going to take a little thinking. You ready? Consider the possibility that by definition, the word are or are not or is in many ways a superstition. Here's what I mean. There's a lot of practicality in going through that entire list for service providers and so forth. But there's no reality to they're in a rush, they're not motivated, whatever. It's just our view of what they are, which is a superstition, but there's real practicality in putting a list of these superstitions together. So I want to throw that out there. Meaning, none of these are hard stops. And none of them are real.
Is it a superstition or is it a guess or a
Generalization,
Yes.
generalization, yeah.
Superstition takes it into a weird place in mind.
It might take it into a weird place. Let's just say it's not fixed or not true.
It's not
But a
an absolute.
possibility.
It's not an absolute, yes.
Yeah.
Well, and it's an opinion of those making the judgment call here, right? Not necessarily quote unquote a fact per se.
Right. Which is super practical to take your world and to create this list and then create things around it that create different contexts to move people into action, but shouldn't be a stopping point.
Well, I think the point of the question and the discussion this month too, a bit is, you're absolutely right about that, Bill. Now what? Right? How do we deal with these things that are blocking us from moving technology that we know would be beneficial to the industry, to the world, into this market space, right? How do we do that? How do we get past those blockades that we're coming across?
The first way you do it, in my opinion, not that you were looking for a direct answer, you get that the blockades often, stay with me, reside in our own mind.
Yeah, so I like this approach, Bill. So a good example back to the risk averse, building owners are risk averse. I mean, that's an easy one to overcome, right? Is to demonstrate how you've got a solution that doesn't produce risk. And you could demonstrate that. If you could successfully do that, then, to Bill's point, it's risk averse is just a state of mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it a state of mind or is it a responsibility that somebody has in his or her job?
Very good question.
We talked about that a few months back, that the other way of another answer to that question is building owners are a system. In other words, there isn't just one individual. There are lots of different players within a building owner organization. And it's almost like, I remember having this discussion 3 or 4 months back. It's almost like they're fighting, not against each other, but they're not, with respect to buildings, they're not aligned with each other.
Maybe so. So I'll respond to your question. Hey, are they risk averse or are they just fiduciarily responsible? It's context. We could be there risk averse and we're like, oh crap. But if we go, wait, they're just looking out for their business. That means I got to bring the goods to them. It's all context.
It is. And remember, very often we're not talking, an owner isn't one person typically, right? And what is it from the movie? We always get handed off to the Animal House dudes.
Yes.
That Jim always says.
Jim Lee's statement, yeah.
Yeah.
Sydney and yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly in support of what Bill is saying, right? We're not bringing the right message to the right people at the right time, right? So in the same way, you can apply that same thing with the adoption curve. We need to bring an innovation message to those early adopters and a low risk outcomes oriented message to the everyone else later in that curve, right?
Right, exactly. And that's back to how do you get from the early adopters to the mass market? Because that's, at the end of the day, in my mind, the difference is the early adopters they personally have overcome things like risk and concerns, and that they're willing to jump feet first. Right. The mass markets go, no, I have to do due diligence. I've got multiple people I report to. I have to go through process. And okay, I get that. So let me help you take you through that process. Right.
Yeah, we're mad about our customers doing their job.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in the restaurant space where we play a lot, they are absolutely bombarded every day. They're so visible in public, and literally people can walk in their front door and try to sell them stuff. And they have such a wall up because they've been bombarded and burned and, lied to. There's a reason they're risk averse to things like this, right? And it has to do with their experience.
Listen, I learned a long time ago, Tracy, from a property manager, big property manager out in the DC area, who told me years ago. It was funny. I was sitting in a room, in the control room one day, just doing whatever I was doing, and this sales guy walked in to see my customer, and he wanted to sell him door handles. I said, okay, door handles. And the guy was doing his pitch, and I was just sitting to the side listening. The guy was doing his pitch and trying to sell, and he had all this malarkey, like they were the most secure handles, the most energy efficient. That was the other one he was saying, the most energy efficient door handles because they closed the door faster or some crap. I don't know. And in the end, the guy was like, look, all to show you how good they are, just give me one floor and I'll come in and I'll put all the new handles in, and you could try them for a month or 2 months or whatever. And the guy said no. I said, no, still not. Don't want to know. Don't want to know. And he walked in. And I said, and his name's Brian. I said, Brian, I don't understand. Why would you not just, it was a free offer to show the value. He goes, you know how the guy's going to be. He's going to come in. It's going to be disruptive. He's going to make a mess. He's going to tear up my furniture. Then it won't work. I'm going to have to ask him to tear it out. He'll take 2 months. It says, that's not the way that I want to buy door handles. Right. And I went, okay. So, it's even as simple as door handles, they're risk averse. And that was one of my lessons that I took for many years back. Like, and his point was the message that the guy was giving him was not what he was wanting to hear about door handles. Not that they don't want to buy door handles. I mean, they buy millions of door handles, right? But he was just not getting the message, and just saying that I'm going to put them in for free for 2 months or whatever didn't help.
Because the dude selling was focused on risk averse when the guy actually wasn't risk averse. He was like douchebag averse, or I don't want to deal with, you know what I mean? So if he'd come in with a different angle, the guy would have been like, oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly right. And that was door handles, the simple thing, right?
Yeah.
And imagine energy management systems in that same scenario, right?
Right.
Oh, we'll come in and you can, do a pilot for free or whatever. It's like, no, you're going to tear out all my thermostats and my light, mess up my lighting. There's real, again, experience behind that decision process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I got to say, it's been our experience when we're talking cybersecurity or networking. IT always does this. So you could take that as, it's IT, or you could say, they're doing their job. If they weren't doing that, you're not even in the right ballpark. So thank you, IT, for doing that. Now let's see if I've got the tech that makes you say this.
Right.
So it's down to messaging and communication and how you approach and context of that.
Which is, if you come back to our earlier statement of the market is quite diverse, is not a simple challenge, right? Which means you can't have one story doesn't fit all, right? Because we have such a wide spectrum of people, and they're all going to come at it from a slightly different perspective and a slightly different need and requirement and stuff. And clearly the door handle guy never quite understood what the guy was looking for from a door. He didn't even bother. I mean, it was just his pitch. He had his PowerPoint and his pitch and his brochure and his sample, and that's all he was going to do.
Yeah.
If he bothered to listen to the guy for 10 minutes to actually ask him a question about what did he need in the door handle.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of having a fixed position, he's risk averse, so I'll take the risk away.
Right.
So good.
So how do we think about this for us, for data and for smarts in buildings? How do we get there?
Hey, I don't want to just give the answers, but I can. You guys go first.
Come on, Bill. Why
Hey,
hold back
first
now?
of all, you get that all these are legit and not true. And they're legit. It's a good starting point so that you don't block yourself. I'll leave it at that for now.
Well, we've established a couple of things that we probably can all agree upon, right? Which is, in general, none of our customers are exactly the same, right? And we talk to customers with different profiles in different places on the adoption curve all the time. And now the question is, what do you do about those two things, for instance? Let maybe start there. So due diligence and knowing your customer and doing your homework before you go in front of somebody is a big part of that. Understanding where they're coming from, not going in with a pitch, going in and listening to people first, right? Needs to be a big part of that whole thing. And then even if you're doing it from afar, you know, there's a lot of new tools out there that you really can target your messaging based on just a little bit of information that you can kind of scrape, you know, from your website if they come, you know, looking for different products or different things, or you know their market that they're in or the type of building that they have. You can really kind of customize and target your messages, right? Instead of doing a mailing to 10,000 people that are all the same, how about doing 100 mailings to 100 groups that all have a little bit different message based on their profile, right?
So that's a really interesting approach, a subject, Tracy. So when you think about that, when you think through that a little bit, to understand someone in our space, right? For me to understand Brian in DC and his property, you need to have done this for a long time to understand what happens and how it works and what his issues and problems are. You know, that's how a building owner, building manager operates a building is not a trivial concept, you know, and it's wide. I mean, the things he has to do is quite wide, from IT through to plumbing, through to airflow, through to energy, through to electrical. You know, it's quite a wide spectrum. And I think this is part of our challenge in our space a little bit is you've either had to live that, you know, been through it and done it and lived it and understand the issues, or you've got to really know and understand the marketplace and, you know, have been doing this for a while. And I think that's part of our challenge, right? Is how do we get people who know how to sell to those sort of folks? Because if our premise is you've got to listen to and understand what their problems and challenges are, again, my door handle guy, I mean, you would think that's the simplest thing that you could possibly sell to a building owner is a door handle, you know. And he clearly didn't take this guy, he was a kid at the time, but he didn't really take the time and the effort to understand what Brian's real problem was with door handles.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm looking at Scott, what he wrote here. I'd like for him to deepen that a little bit about behavioral economics, what that means by the humans value losses 3 to 5 times greater than. I don't know, Scott, if you can deepen that or not. Can we unmute Scott or no?
Scott, do you want to be unmuted, be on screen? To ask him first.
Isn't that the insurance? There he is. They said yes.
Yeah, I have. You are now promoted, Scott, as a panelist. If you can introduce yourself a little bit. And
And unmute.
Can you guys hear me?
yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so so this point comes back from kind of the early discoveries of a guy named Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics a number of years ago. And so basically what he and his research partner did is they studied the question, how do humans really make decisions? And so economists, you know, assumed that everybody was Mr. Spock, right? And everything was completely rational and everything was known. And so all decisions were completely rational and logical, kind of mathematically speaking. And what they found was that one of their first discoveries was this idea of loss aversion, they called it. And it's this idea that, like, if you have a you know, heads I win, tails you lose sort of situation, you needed a much greater gain than the potential loss for people to actually accept the challenge, right? So it's like, you know, I was kind of joking, but like if you said, well, you'll lose $100 if you flip heads and you'll gain $100 if you flip tails, you'd go, well, okay, 50-50, I'm gonna 50-50 chance of winning, 50-50 chance of losing, that's a bad bet. But they'd say, well, what if I gave you $200 if you win and $100 if you lose? And a lot of people, and this was repeatable, would go, yeah, I still don't like those odds.
Yeah.
Right. And so what ends up happening is when you're doing, you know, B2B type sales, where there's a lot of people, there's a lot of chance for recrimination in politics, career limiting decisions, that sort of stuff. You find that customers tend to be very, very good at inventing or imagining reasons why something will fail. And, you know, and yet they really struggle with the advantages. And so you guys were sort of tiptoeing around that based on your own practical experience. And so that's, you know, that's kind of the thing you've got to think about is your prospect is constantly doing this calculus, right? And everything they think of, in a sense, you need to assume is almost overweighted. Because, like, you know, like somebody described with the doorknobs, right? Like, oh yeah, but, you know, I might get the small benefit, but, you know, the odds of this thing working are pretty low in my experience. And then the cost of them not working goes way beyond just the initial installation cost and all that.
Right.
And so, you know, like in consulting, very often you'll run into this thing, like this is kind of like a classic McKinsey thing. If they can't with a straight face pitch a 10x improvement for the customer, they know that they don't have a chance, simply because all the, not just the practical economics, but the psychology of it. Once the customer or the client starts to discount all the possible things that could go wrong, you know, and may go wrong, because some will, you know, then they kind of get to a number that might actually be worth doing. And when you look at IT projects and sort of transformation projects, you see a similar thing. Like the failure rates tend to be pretty high. And so, you know, that sort of heuristic of, you need to be able to describe a massive improvement for me to even be worth paying attention to it.
So what you're saying is you've got to describe the 10x because he's going to discount it for all the other things that knows it's not going to work. And then once he does that discount, it might end up at a 2x in his mind. And then he goes, okay, that's good enough. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and you blokes are old enough to know the saying, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. And so, you know, that's kind of the other side of it, right? Is if I have to do something. And if I choose, you know, IBM and it goes wrong, or I choose McKinsey and it goes wrong, like I did everything I humanly could. And then it was just bad luck, right? It wasn't decision making.
Yeah.
Okay.
My perspective on that is that's the cheap way of doing due diligence, right?
Yeah. Well, it's
by not doing any.
Well, it's wisdom of the crowds. And
Right.
I remember who brought up the chasm marketing, but, you know, I've been sort of thinking about that and trying to apply it since my days in Silicon Valley, you know, in the late 90s when the book came out. And effectively what's happening is the majority is letting the early adopters assess the products, right? The competing products. And then whoever the early adopters kind of converge on, then the majority says, okay, we don't need to think, the whole herd will just move in on that. Now, the thing that's funny though, is Everett Rogers, the guy who sort of is the grandfather of this diffusion of innovation process, you know, he has said explicitly in his book, I've never seen a chasm in his experience. And they've studied, you know, everything from hybrid corn, you know, being adopted by farmers to, you know, all sorts of crazy stuff. They see it more as a continuum, is not a discontinuity between the two. And so Jeff Moore, who wrote Crossing the Chasm, was an English major who then went into consulting in Silicon Valley. So you know, take that as you wish. And I actually know the guy who introduced Everett Rogers to Jeff Moore. So I have a bit of an inside line on that one.
Cool. Yeah. I'll tell you what, folks, Scott, that was brilliant. And when we could take the brain functionality and start to create language that speaks to the human frailties and the human like condition, that's just fabulous, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of very predictable patterns, and that's what Kahneman did. I mean, if you're curious, he wrote a really good book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and it kind of covers the whole body of his work over, you know, decades. It's a long book, but it's in very bite-sized chapters, and some friends have done the audio book, so you can listen to, you know, each chapter is only a couple pages, and they're all about all these different cognitive biases. So. Very, very worthwhile to do. I mean, I was an engineer who got into product management in Silicon Valley, and I kept watching these brilliant companies run by engineers fail. And so I actually went back to school and did a master's degree in marketing and strategy to try to understand this. So
nice.
I'm a bit of a nerd on this topic.
So just to extend you, and I agree with everything you've just said, Scott, as far as there's all this science and there's all this great research and there's all these people who've done the understanding and all their processes. But would you concede, though, that I could take all that science and knowledge and skills as a sales guy and apply it to, for argument's sakes, you know, selling doorknobs? And I don't want to demean doorknobs. I'm sure there's a lot of technology involved in doorknobs that I don't fully understand, of course. I'm just using it as an example. If anybody's out there, a doorknob seller, pardon my frankness. But if you compare that to, you know, trying to sell an energy management solution with analytics, you know, that's, to me, that's a two-step level of complexity that you have to get involved with. You have to get involved with not only everything that you've just described about the science of how do you go from early adopters to the early majorities, but you have to do all that in the context of a fairly complex product to begin with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think perhaps the most important thing that's often forgotten when technologists go out and try to sell things is this point that unless you really effectively characterize your target your customer, you know, who are you talking to versus who should really be buying this product, right? That's often where you get into trouble. And the doorknob example is perfect, right? Because you may have been talking to somebody who was a late majority. And,
right,
you know, and they will not do it unless 10 of their colleagues have already done it.
Right.
You know, and still they'll go into it kicking and screaming. And that's the thing, right? Is unless you understand the psychology of each individual and kind of where they fit into that pattern, you know, it's a lost cause.
Yeah,
what's that? Go ahead.
It's a lot. It may be a lost cause, quote unquote, but I say there's enough consensus of human nature that, you know, it doesn't matter how it could be trying to convince your wife, let's get a condo in Mexico, to let's sell. The human biases they're all there, and they're all pretty consistent.
Yeah, but I think they're there, but I think there's also different weighting, you know, and some people are more adventurous. And I mean, if you look at if you go into Rogers' books and Jeff Moore's Crossing the Chasm, you know, the thing is, it's the psychology of the different segments that's so important in the context. And so you're right. I mean, everybody's got sort of the same, you know, genetic structure for the most part, but there's nature and nurture. Yeah. And, you know, early adopters, not only do they have greater comfort with uncertainty and they're less risk averse just in general, but not always. But on top of that, they also have the political and economic capital to take those long shots. And they're in a position where it's just like venture capital, right? They go, well, VCs say, well, I'll lose 90% of my money, but the 10% that wins will give me a 5x or 10x return. And so that's exactly how early adopters think. You know, they take shots. They know that not all of them will pan out, but the ones that do succeed will, basically give them a quantum leap. That's kind of the joke, right? And they're in an organization where, if they miss 4 out of 5 times, it's okay, as long as the 5th one, pushes them well ahead of their competition for the next 5 years. And so
Right.
that's the game that they're playing. But the mainstream folks, for the most part, they're just trying to keep their heads above water, right? And they're the ones who just buy IBM and don't worry about it. And I've worked in lots of different industries, and there's always an IBM, and oftentimes that company tends to get really abusive. Like in the public transit world I worked in for quite a while, and there's a company called Trapeze that builds effectively the ERPs for transit systems, and they're just abusive. And now what they're doing is they keep launching new businesses to try to distance themselves from the original brand, which is quite funny. And now they did a company called TripSpark, and now TripSpark is buying another company to give themselves 2 degrees of separation.
Cool.
So I want to use the last 3-4 minutes of today to try and sort of figure out what do we do with this. I think we've uncovered some really sort of interesting thoughts today.
So, Anto, I think there's the original idea was building owners are whatever, right? And there were some very good comments about characterizing the state. We haven't necessarily identified the root cause problem or identified a solution for any of these descriptions, in the sense that here we are collaborating as a group, and we're doing it voluntarily. We're trying to help each other, but the people on this call are all industry participants from a supplier perspective. We don't have, to the best of my knowledge, we have very few end user building owner participants in this audience. Okay, and it occurs to me that building owners don't have a place that they can go to learn about smart buildings, to get educated, to in a non-vendor prejudiced fashion. So each one of us can tell our story and do it in a way that's prejudiced to our point of view. Okay, but there isn't really that I'm aware of an independent educational organization out there who's focused on end users and teaching them. For example, just think about a building automation system. If I'm a facilities engineer or I'm responsible with director of facilities, how do I judge whether the building automation system that I just purchased is meeting what it should meet from an expectation standpoint? Is it working well? I know I bought it, it's functional, but relative to how it could be working versus how it is working, is very different. And I just think there's this gap in the industry because we're all working in our own little silos as suppliers, doing the best job we can. This group right here is trying to get some level of collaboration, but there's to the best of my knowledge, there's no place for owners to go to get smart about smarter buildings.
But Steve, I'm
Yep.
sorry, wouldn't you say that that's why they hire consultants?
Used to.
But that's a consultant. That's not that's a consultant, but it's not a educational institution, if you will. A group that literally creates content on all of the possible subjects and helps educate facilities engineers, facilities managers, really focuses not just on us, because we know how to get smart because we're doing it, but it doesn't focus on the building owners who are the buyers of this technology.
I was going to say, I think we've all come to an agreement that applies to anyone selling almost any technology, but what can we do specifically to our industry here to really move this forward, right?
Yeah. And it's somewhere in the communication and understanding sort of perspective. It's not technology, it's not something.
Well, I will still go out there a little bit and think part of my takeaway still has been, I don't know that we have the right answer yet. I don't know we've cracked the answer, to be honest. I think we're still trying to work it out.
I think part of the issue is if there was a silver bullet here, somebody within ear's range of all this would have figured it out, right?
Yes.
And wouldn't need to be on this call.
True.
Wouldn't want to be on this call. So, but there are little bits and pieces and examples throughout the industry. I mean, I lived through the lawn backnet wars, right? And one of the key elements for backnet really dominating that over time was it was an ASHRAE standard. There's an IBM of our industry. ASHRAE is neutral.
Took the risk out of it. Yeah.
Right. So, any engineer who put an ASHRAE spec in their spec, specified that technology isn't going to be punished if it doesn't work.
It's the IBM concept that Scott just said. Yeah.
Right. So maybe we're, as a group, just not utilizing or identifying or working within some of those things, or maybe that's another week's discussion. Where are the non-biased, the non-company,
Right.
the non-for-profit, places in our industry where maybe we can stick our toe in the door and drive some good in education, like Steve was talking about.
So that's probably a good place to wrap for today. I think it's been great. And Scott, I think you've provided the best answer so far. Building owners
I liked
are
it.
humans. Thank you.
Proceed with caution. Yes. Very good.
Thanks for your contribution, Scott, and everybody else. And we'll get the video up tomorrow, and we'll be back next week, and we'll continue this conversation in some form of structure. We'll figure it out on Wednesday, but talk to you all next Monday. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Have a great week.
Say again.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Scott.
Bye all.
Thanks, Scott. That was great.
Cheers.